guys, it's me Bo, back once again with another cult movie review. I hope everyone is doing well. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the controversial Australian drama Bad Boy Bubby. Now, this movie only came to my attention after someone recommended it to me several months ago. Up until that point, I'd never heard of it before, and it was completely new to me. I was intrigued by the film's concept, but given its brutal nature, I kind of held back and waited a while before actually checking it out. So the movie, written and directed by Rolf de Heer, starred actor Nicholas Hope in the lead role as Bubby. Once the film was made, it was submitted to the 1993 Venice Film Festival, where it actually went on to win the Grand Jury Prize. But several months after that, the movie would go on to get a commercial release, and it failed at the box office. Now, having seen Bad Boy Bubby in its entirety, I'm not that surprised that this movie bombed with general audiences. It's some very harsh and disturbing material, and clearly it was always going to alienate a large population of moviegoers. So when it comes to the actual plot, the movie centered around Bubby, played by Nicholas Hope, a mentally challenged man living with his abusive mother, Florence, who was played by actress Claire Benito. She lied to her son. She put fear into her own son's heart. She was a controlling, manipulative woman, and you just hated the character as soon as you saw her. While the mother would occasionally actually leave the apartment, Bubby was left to his own devices, told to stay still and basically never leave. Not only was Bubby emotionally and mentally abused, he was also physically abused sexually, when his mother often would actually sleep with him in a disgusting act of incest. You had to feel bad for Bubby. He was clearly being abused, and he couldn't see what was actually going on. You wanted the character to, wake up and, fight back, but he just was completely unaware the whole time. Now, one of the most controversial aspects of this film was the portrayal of animal cruelty. So Bubby had his very own pet cat, and while the mother, Florence, would abuse Bubby, in return, Bubby would torment his own cat. But this torment soon turned into torture when Bubby eventually would go on to suffocate the cat, and once the cat had died, Bubby just kind of went on like nothing had happened. He couldn't even comprehend death or the actual dying process. He just was completely numb to it all, completely unaware at the time of what he was doing in terms of his neglect. But then separately, once the cat had passed, there was no mourning. He just was completely numb to everything. Seeing animal cruelty, whether it be genuine or fake, for me personally, it's very hard to witness. But what's interesting about this film is that the animal abuse that we see on screen, it was presented in a more indirect way, since Bubby never actually intended to kill the cat. And I guess in some ways, having Bubby be this mentally challenged individual kind of made the whole thing seem more easier to accept. I mean, he wasn't evil. He never had the intention to kill. Yeah, he was, I guess, guilty of severe neglect, completely unaware of what he was doing. I guess in that sense, in terms of the audience's perspective, you could still kind of get behind Bubby. You know, you could still root for him because he wasn't really to blame. He wasn't a hated figure. Bubby's long-lost father, Harold, suddenly returned out of nowhere and rekindled his love for Florence. Bubby was, quite rightly confused over this guy who suddenly, showed up and started calling him son. Harold, played by actor Ralph Cotterill, quickly became the dominant figure in the household. No longer was the mother sleeping with Bubby. Instead, she had left him to one side. He was disregarded, and suddenly she was all over Harold. I mean, it was bad enough seeing the cat die, but seeing these two old fogies, getting it on, not my cup of tea. From Bubby's viewpoint, it was a form of rejection, and he definitely had a hard time dealing with the situation. You had Bubby on one side, you had Harold on the other, and these two would continuously clash. And it was quite obvious that these two, were not going to be able to get along, so something had to give. The dad, just like the mother, would go on to mistreat and talk down to Bubby. I mean, this guy had not been in his life for many years, and suddenly he shows up and starts ordering Bubby around, and who the hell did this guy think he was? Anyways, this all led to Bubby one night finally snapping and actually killing his parents as they slept in the living room. Just like the cat, Bubby would go on to suffocate both his parents using cling film, a sinister and deadly action by Bubby, who suddenly found himself free to roam around as he pleased. It took some time for Bubby to, pick up the courage, but eventually he would leave the apartment and join the rest of the world. I did feel bad for the guy because his whole life, his whole world was that dingy apartment, but now finally he had escaped. And once Bubby had actually left, he was in complete disbelief over what he saw. The sky, the trees, the cars, he'd never seen anything like it before. And surprisingly, the movie then turned into this comedic drama where we saw Bubby go off on his random adventures. And this would all lead to Bubby meeting this local rock band who would then take him under their wing, look after him, and show him a good time. To think that Bubby, his whole life, had been locked away. So the concept of music, that must have been a pretty big deal for him. Initially, he was just kind of hanging around, but one night he found himself on stage with the band, delivering this strange triad of words which the audience loved. Suddenly, the band were a hit, and Bubby was their lead vocalist. I mean, to go from the dark imagery of the cat at the beginning of the film to then seeing Bubby on stage, being this rock star, it was quite a turn of events. And as the group were gaining popularity in this new fan base, it all seemed to go over Bubby's head. Even like when he was on stage, he wasn't nervous. He didn't have the mental capacity to understand embarrassment. He was just, full on in everything he did. It was like he just couldn't grasp the concept of being a, popular, famous singer. And, when I do think about it, it kind of was a scumbag move on the band's part to allow this to happen. You know, as much as it was a kind of interesting and fun thing to see, you know, Bubby on stage, still, he was a mentally challenged man and clearly didn't know what he was getting himself into. Yet the band kind of used him for their own gains. The band should have known better, but you know, it was what it was. He wasn't a singer. He was not a performer. He was this unique person in his own way that attracted many people wanting to see him perform on stage. You know, at this point in the movie, I kind of was expecting something sinister to happen. Maybe Bubby would kill himself, or I don't know, even his fellow bandmates. But instead, we saw Bubby fall in love with a nurse played by actress Carmel Johnson. We saw Bubby fall head over heels for this woman who clearly reminded him of his own mother, the only person Bubby had ever loved. The two were courting and, yeah, eventually they got together. The movie had this surprisingly upbeat, happy ending, a complete contrast to what we saw in the beginning of the film. So, yeah, seeing the happy ending did, I don't know, it was almost like a swerve. Like, I was like, really? This is how we're going to end it? You know, they live happily ever after, but they do. And taking a step back and just in terms of the character of Bubby, yeah, I'm glad that it all worked out for him. Now, when it comes to the acting in this movie, I have to praise the actor Nicholas Hope for his performance in the lead role. Hope, no doubt, carried this movie. He was the driving force that pushed the narrative forward. He was extremely convincing in the role, and I'm surprised that there was no, I won't say necessarily Oscar, you know, nominations, but you know, just more notoriety for this actor. I was totally lost in Hope's portrayal of Bubby, this, I don't know, bizarre, oddball character who'd been hidden away for all these years. Bubby's childlike manner was crafted so well, and you know, Hope's performance didn't feel forced or overly dramatic. Hope played the role perfectly, and I am surprised that he didn't go on to have a bigger career in the industry. As for the rest of the cast, I thought everyone delivered solid performances in their respective roles. Actress Claire Benito, who played Bubby's mother, Florence, gave such a earnest portrayal of this unhinged, vile woman. It was great stuff. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, you know, watching her, you just hated the character, and when she finally met her demise, you know, there was no sympathy, was there? And so, dislikes for Bad Boy Bubby from 1993. My main dislike for the film would have to be on how the filmmakers handled the animal abuse that we saw in the film. When those scenes of Bubby suffocating the cat played out on screen, we saw several distressing images of the cat in this helpless state. Putting the context to one side and just focusing on the actual execution, I felt the filmmakers were, I don't know, almost trying to create controversy with how they depicted the animal abuse on screen. And when I think about it, there really was no need to show this lifeless cat being poked and prodded by Bubby. I don't know, in my eyes, wrapping the cat up in cling film, suffocating it to death, it was all done for shock value. It was purposely executed and stylized in that way to, I would say, create controversy for when this movie, you know, finally got released. And you know, the director going this route and choosing this way to kind of frame everything, it, it just wasn't necessary. The director was capable of more, yet they decided to take this very gritty stance that I felt was actually quite distasteful. When you look at the later sequence, for example, where we saw Bubby go to prison and get sexually assaulted, I mean, that sequence was handled way more artistically. You had the camera closed in on Bubby's face as he was bent over being assaulted. Now, this assault could have easily have been this, horrific graphic scene, but instead, the filmmakers decided to take a more dynamic approach. It was a complete contrast to how they handled the animal abuse. And so that all leads me to believe that the cat abuse was done with this ulterior motive, as I mentioned, to shock audiences, yes, but also create, a shock for the media when the film got released. No doubt you could have easily have removed several of those graphic images of the cat, and it would have not affected the narrative in any way. Adding several shots of the cat just laying there lifeless, it was just adding insult to injury. And so, ratings for Bad Boy Bubby from 1993. It took me a while really to fully kind of grasp what I had seen, and because the film started very dark and ended completely, happy and light and fluffy, and it is just very strange. And it took me a few days to really kind of think about this, but I would actually say my rating for this would be a 4.5 out of 10. Bad Boy Bubby was a film that had this very intriguing premise, but for me it failed to develop into something more compelling. With how things started, I was expecting to see this brutal exploitation film, when in reality the movie is better described as this, black comedy. But still, judging by what I saw, the acting was solid and the narrative was structured well. I just can't say I was overly impressed. The longer it went on, for me, the story kind of lost some steam, and my interests started to wane. I mean, yes, it was very nice to see Bubby have a happy ending and, find romance. But if I'm being honest, in terms of a viewer's standpoint, it did feel kind of underwhelming and lackluster. With how things turned out, I can definitely see how this movie generated a cult following, and I do praise the filmmakers for their efforts. The moody score by Graham Tardif, coupled with the ugly depictions of incest and dead animals, the whole thing was very hard to watch at times, yet it was also captivating. I do recommend Bad Boy Bubby, but please be aware, the first 15 to 20 minutes are pretty dark stuff. A 90-minute oddball drama that definitely stands out from most movies I've seen. And well, that's all from me today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed it. I will be back next week with another cult movie review. Don't forget to subscribe, and of course, take care. Bye-bye.